Hello. This video is a guide to what you should try and cover in the sections of your paper. A highly structured paper will usually be composed of an abstract, introduction, methods, results, and discussion sections. A less structured paper, for example a review, may only consist of an abstract, introduction, discursive piece, and conclusion. The time you allocate to write in each section should be determined by its importance. The title, abstract, and figures are viewed by far more people than the rest of the paper, with the methods section being read least of all. So let's consider the title of the paper. Titles are becoming increasingly important as a way of navigating the literature and deciding what to download. A title should ideally be something catchy which sums up the point of the paper, a description of the process, or the key finding. I like my paper titles to start with a catchy phrase, for example, apps for angiosperms or bryophytes for beginners. The abstract should convey the entire message of the paper. It needs to tell a complete story. The first sentence introduces the field in which the particular research is situated. This context is narrowed until it lands on the open question that the research answered. Next, it describes the novel method or approach that was used to fill the gap or question, followed by a summary of the results. Finally, the conclusion interprets the results to answer the question that was posed at the beginning, then considers its broader significance. The keywords consist of words or phrases to describe the main topics in your paper. It is important to spend time on these, as it will influence how often your paper is detected in database searches. In a couple of my earlier papers, I omitted an important theoretical term for my field from my keywords, which means they've probably had less exposure than they might have done. If I'd looked closely at the keywords that other authors in my specific field were using, I would probably have noticed this omission. The introduction highlights the gap that exists in current knowledge or methods and its importance. This is usually done by a set of progressively more specific paragraphs that finish with an explanation of what is lacking, followed by a paragraph summarising what the paper does to fill that gap. You're explaining what is known about the topic in the relevant literature before landing on the critical unknown, the knowledge gap that your paper will address. The methods section of a paper provides the information by which the study's validity is judged. For a scientific study, this requires a clear and precise description of how an experiment was done and the rationale for why specific procedures were chosen. Many other disciplines will require a methodology section instead, describing the philosophical and epistemological underpinnings of your work. In my field of science education, we tend to provide both a methods and a methodology section. The results section needs to convince the reader that the central claim is supported by data and logic. Every argument has its own particular logical structure, which dictates the sequence in which its elements should be presented. For example, in the sciences, a paper may set up a hypothesis, verify that a method for measurement is valid in the system under study, and then use the measurements to disprove the hypothesis. In the humanities, an argument may be constructed as a series of building blocks, themes, topics, and evidence that lead to a central claim or conclusion. How you present the data is similarly important. For quantitative data, figures, their titles and legends are particularly important because they show the most objective support data of the steps that culminate in the paper's claim. Moreover, Figures are often viewed by readers who skip directly from the abstract in order to save time. Thus, the title of the figure should communicate the conclusion of the analysis, and the legend should explain how it was done. If you are using qualitative data or a mixed methods approach, pay attention to how the journal includes and presents extracts from the data. Are they included in the main body of the text as quotes or italicized vignettes? The discussion section explains how the results have filled the gap that was identified in the introduction, provides caveats to the interpretation, and describes how the paper advances the field by providing new opportunities. The first paragraph usually summarizes the important findings from the results section. Subsequent paragraphs describe an area of weakness or strength of the paper, which is then evaluated through linkages to the relevant literature. The conclusion is a synthesis of the key points of your paper, which helps the reader understand why your research should matter to them. Thank you for listening. I hope this has provided you with a more in-depth understanding about the constituents of a paper.